Welcome to the Backend Premier League Combine. Now we're here because what we want to do is to train you to become client success managers. Remember, a client success manager is someone that helps after someone buys a coaching program, essentially. So they'll be in charge of making the client succeed. That's why it's called Client Success Manager. Okay? So in this training, I'll go through the fundamentals of being a Client Success Manager. This is not going to be a training in which you'll have all the nitty gritty. You'll have all the things that you'll need in order to succeed at the role, but this is not intended to be an in-depth training because for that we have our weekly combined calls in which you not only will be training, but you'll be watched by founders of coaching companies, of consulting companies that will be interested in potentially hiring you. Okay, so let's start. This will only be this video. Let's start with the onboarding mastery. So something that you have to take into consideration is that the first 7 days, and even then I would consider the first 48 to 24 to 48 hours, determine the client perception on the business, on the coaching company. So if you work with a coach and he or she onboards a new client, your priority is to make sure within the first 24 to 48 hours, the client experience is incredible. And after that, of course, too. But what I mean is we have to really focus on the first 24 to 48 hours. Second, client expectations. As I told you like a couple minutes ago, I said, this is not my client at this point. But as I said, this is not an in-depth training. I said that because I needed to set the expectations with you. And the reason why I did it is because, as I often say, delivery, which is the part of the business a client success manager runs, which happens after the sale, after someone buys a coaching program, is, as I often say, 10% about technical skills and 90% about managing expectations. There's a great book called Customer Success Manifesto that I would recommend you guys to read, and the other one, The Coaching Habit. Okay, if you want to be amazing client success managers and be ahead of the curve, read those two books immediately, right? And we have red flag detection. This is something that can happen when you know you have a client with which the sales team had problems in the close. What do I mean by that? When you sell to somebody, you don't have to know this part, but you need the context. So when a closer or a sales representative sells to somebody, it can happen either without friction, like the person is already bought in and just pays, or there can be some objections in the way, some worries about the program, about themselves, like everything. So something that we need to take into consideration here is that you need constant communication with the closer or the person that is selling. If you have clear communication and you always take into consideration what other people on your team have talked with someone, you'll win. Actually, information is key. You need to ask for information about the client. It's really important. Okay? Then red flag detection, something else. Let's say someone asks for a refund, which can happen. You cannot panic, and you have to be able to handle those conversations. Actually, on the Combine, we'll role play that type of conversations because as a coaching company scales, they become more often, but not because your program is worse necessarily, but because if you have more people just by math or because of math, you can expect more people to complain and more people to get results. Like it's both ways. Okay? So something you really need is to track activity. This is really important. Someone can complain or someone can say, I'll leave the program and I will not keep paying, because one thing is that you can, like the sales representatives, can either sell for them to pay in full, which means if the program is 3K, they would pay 3K, the client would pay 3K upfront, or there may be an option to pay on installments, let's say 3 installments of 1K, which could be common. What happens is, let's say the person enters and pays 1K to join. So there will be 2K that are missing still. Those 2K will be collected only if the person, of course, is happy with the program, right? So your responsibility as a client success manager is to make sure they have a great experience, of course they get results, and finally they pay. This is not particularly your job. Like a CSM shouldn't be asking for the payments of their clients. That should be handled by someone else. But I just want you to have context on what I'm explaining right now. Okay? So you always need to track activity. If someone stops replying or is not doing the work, you cannot wait for them to complain or to say they will not continue. The number one indicator someone will continue paying is them using the product. Imagine this analogy. Imagine you are at a gym, or you were at a gym and then you stopped using it. Most client success people would only ask what happened once the person decides to cancel the gym membership, because they will not be going, right? What intelligent, clever client success managers do is, once they notice, they stop engaging, they stop taking action, they stop, for example, logging in to Slack, which is a communication platform that you may get familiar with if you enter to a coaching company. Once these things happen, you'll have to reach out to your client. And this is really important. Once they don't reply, you follow up. And if they don't reply, you follow up again with more intensity. Okay? This is really important. You reach out again and again and again and again. You need your client to know you care about them, and also you need to avoid them losing momentum. Which means once they make a decision with the sales rep, most of the times they say like, yeah, let's do this. Let's work on this. so they got a little bit of momentum. But some people lose momentum too quickly. You have to avoid them losing momentum and helping them understand always what's the next step. This is really key. Is one of these things in which, even though it sounds simple, it makes all the difference. Because what you have to understand in the client success side is, most often than not, people don't have results not because the program is bad, but because they get overwhelmed and then they don't take action. So, something you can recommend to your coach, if you have one, to your coach, to your head coach, is make the process less overwhelming, right? Of course, this is not specifically your job. That's what I work with my paid clients, the people that is on the backend Premier League. But you have to be able to understand what's the real problem. Of course, before suggesting changes, you really need to tackle this part, to do everything I'm telling you to do so that you can get results for your team, essentially. Okay? So, in terms of ticket resolution and async comms, in terms of communication with clients, this is a part of how the offer is going to be structured, like how it's going to be sold by sales and marketing. So it kind of depends on your coach, but you need clarity. You need to understand what is the client actually getting, right? Because based on that, these expectations we were speaking about will be set. And if you don't meet expectations, you'll get a lot of people complaining. And this is not going to be sustainable on the long term for you, nor for your coach, for the coach. So, in terms of communication, like regular ways are one-on-ones, group calls, and by chat. I recommend to use Slack. These one-on-ones is my less preferred way. Actually, people think one-on-one calls are valuable. They are not, unless they have a clear purpose and unless we first worked this out. We are maxing out on chat and solving the most amount of questions via chat. Then you can use one-on-ones, but not as the first way to solve a problem, but as the last one. Okay? Group calls, you also need to be able to run them. One formula I like to run group calls is first to ask for wins and actually request they turn on their cameras. And the reason why I do that is because you want your clients to be aware of they are choosing being here. Like nobody's telling them, and I'm telling you right now, I'm not telling you have to watch this video. If you're scrolling while you're listening to me, just stop watching this video and keep scrolling. Like, it depends on what your goals are. If your goal is to, in this case, to become a client success manager and get paid to do that and upgrade from VA or admin assistant, then pay attention to this as if this was the Bible or something like that. But if you don't have these goals and you're just exploring, then maybe you shouldn't be watching this video. You have to remind these things also on the group calls. Like, hey guys, I understand you may be busy doing other stuff, but if you pay attention, let's say someone is has the camera on and watching the phone. You call them out, but not the particular person, but the whole group. Like, hey guys, I know you can have other things going on, but if you're here, let's make sure you embrace the time here and get results. Or you can get out of this call and do whatever you need to do, which is important to you. But I want you to choose. I want you to be fully present. Because particularly in online environments, this is really important. So this is key. And actually scientific evidence has shown that once you remind people that it's their choice, they'll take more action by default. So that's what we want, because we want to incentivize action. Okay. So you remind them first on the group calls of their wins. Also, it's important for them to feel appreciative of the things they have already achieved. Remember, it's all about expectations, and I would add here perception. And if we help them focus on the good things, they will be able to get more reps doing it and improving it. Cool? Because at the end of the day, what you want as a client success manager, and this applies for life too, is you want to reinforce the right behaviors. So I was listening to a podcast some time ago, and the guy said, my partner, when she cries, the only way I noticed she stops crying is when I get angry. Even though it's not great to get angry, I subconsciously got reinforced to get angry, because that's the only way my partner will stop crying. So what's happening every time the partner of this guy stops crying once he gets angry? That person is reinforcing this guy's actions on getting angry, even though it's not great and the guy recognizes it's not great. So you need to make sure you reinforce the right behaviors. And how you reinforce them? With like showcasing the wins in front of others. This is really important. You always want to showcase client wins in front of others, but you need to give them negative feedback in private. This is really important. If you do it wrong, it can get pretty messy. Okay? So you have group calls, chat on Slack. I really like on Slack to first, of course, track activity. You need to be communicating with your clients pretty often, but something else you need to do is to solve, of course, questions. But those questions need to be solved not as a like chatbot Q&A bot, but as a coaching company, because you are part of a coaching company. And how you do that? Well, the way you do that is you ask them, you tell them to follow the 1-3-1 rule, which is, hi, thanks for, so that they come to you with a question. And then you say, hey, thanks for reaching out. You always want to acknowledge their behavior. Remember, reinforcing the right behaviors. It's great that they ask questions. If you're here expecting to do the least amount of work possible, you'll not survive in the combine, and you'll not survive in this business, because there are several mediocre people out there everywhere. This doesn't happen here. Okay? So once they ask a question, you have to acknowledge the question, like, hey, thanks for reaching out. Now, and they sometimes they'll send you a big text or a big voice note. So after you hear that or read that, you want to ask them like, hey, thanks for reaching out. Can you identify for me what's the real challenge here? So that's one challenge. That's the one. Then when they identify that to you, then you say, okay, thanks. Can you provide me with 3 possible solutions to solving this problem on like that are on your mind already? Then one, can you tell me the best solution from your perspective? And then you start coaching, and then you start helping. In this situation is where the coaching habit is really important. Reading the coaching habit is really important. If you don't have any idea of how to communicate effectively with clients, both on group chat, on chat, or one-on-ones, you really need to read this book. You need to read this book. When someone told me, recommended me to read it, I said I'll read it that exact day, that exact same day. And I did it. And I spent maybe like 2 to 3 hours. So if you see your phone and you see yourself 2 to 3 hours a day on social media, you can read this book in one day. And this is not too much to ask. Okay? So, when to escalate? Well, of course, first, if no processes are in place, is not that fair for the coach, for your boss, essentially, for the leader of your team, to expect that you solve by your own. But if you are one of the people that over delivers, I would highly recommend communicating that with your leader. What do I mean by that? So let's say you want to solve the problems for him or her. You really need to set that expectation, because these expectations thing also works while communicating with team members or leaders. You have to set the expectation like, hey, if something wrong happens, I would rather prefer to solve it without asking you and then tell you what I did. Do you think that's a great way of dealing with challenges, or do you prefer myself to run it through you first? Okay? And a great leader will tell you essentially, hey, yes, I would rather prefer you to solve it. And if you make any mistake, we can adjust on the go. Because that's the thing. You can identify a great leader by the way he or she helps their team members improve, because they are responsible for your growth. Okay? In terms of tools plus tone, of course, you need to be using ChatGPT every single day. Like, if you're not using it, like, what are you doing? And in terms of tone, I already said, you have to be understanding, but you have to also challenge your clients. The way, of course, it depends on the tone of your coach. So you'll have to ask this to them, like, how direct do you want me to be with your clients? But because you're the face of the brand, on the delivery side of things, which is the most important part. So you'll need essentially to improve in terms of tonality based on what your leader suggests, essentially. Something else. It's really important to Be clear with clients. Be clear, not clever. Don't use technical words. This doesn't work here. This doesn't apply here. This is not university. This is not a thesis dissertation. This is not any of that. You need to be clear, both while you're communicating, like personally, and when you're communicating on chat. But you have to tell the clients the truth. For example, when I had a coaching company in which I taught doctors how to pass an exam, someone would tell me, like, hey, I had this inconvenience going on and I wasn't able to study. Most people would say, oh, no worries. But what I asked was like, hey, thank you, totally understand. Remember the acknowledge part. But I would love to ask you a question. What will happen the day of the exam if every time an inconvenience happens, you don't take action? And then you ask. You only ask. This is key from the coaching habit. You ask questions. Don't tell them what to do. You ask questions, and then they come up with the answer and they solve their own problem. That's the difference between a coach and a teacher. You're not a teacher. This is not teaching. This is coaching. Okay? Cool. So, in terms of churn prevention fundamentals, common churn signals. Churn means someone leaving, essentially. So when I say common churn signals, it means what are signals that a client will leave? They stop communicating, they stop taking action, they stop sending what you're asking them to send. But the most important one is they stop communicating and they stop joining the platform. There are some platforms, for example, School, which I'll put in the name here, which will work to put in course modules. This is not particularly your job, but you can do these suggestions to your coach. And on School, there is a part in which you can see when was the last time a person was active. So if you see a client that joined the modules last time, that watched the modules last time like 1 week ago, or was in the community logged in 1 week ago, maybe it's time to reach out. Okay? In terms of tracking client sentiment, you always need to ask feedback. So after every call, you need to ask after every group call and one-on-one, what are you taking from this conversation? What are your takeaways from this conversation? And then you have to also ask, out of 10, from a scale of 1 to 10, how much did you like this session? And if someone says 8 or 9, ask for feedback on how you can improve. If you are not willing to receive feedback from others, you'll make sure you'll not improve. And that is not good. In this role, we need people that is willing to improve. And something else that I wanted to touch on pretty quickly is don't get a client opinion. Like, don't base your perception, your own perception, on one person's opinion. Because sometimes what people say are dependent more on their fleeting emotions than they are on the actual facts. Okay? That's really key. You need to always be asking for feedback. Okay? And in terms of internal communication loops, this is more of for your coach/leader than for yourself, but you need cadence of communication with your leader just to make sure there is alignment. So I would recommend, if you are, let's say, a team of only, let's say, one setter, who is the one that answers messages on the DMs, one closer, which is the one that sells on the phone or via Zoom, and one client success manager, which would be yourself, and then you have your coach and maybe one or two other team members, then you need to be having a weekly meeting every single week, just to create visibility around what's going on in every side of the business for your leader. If you don't create visibility of the challenges you're facing to your leader, he or she is not going to solve it. And if you create visibility and he or she is not solving them, then you're hired on the wrong company, essentially. In terms of weekly reporting plus feedback loops, metrics that matter for you particularly, you need to track both two things: onboarding rating and net promoter score. Okay, so you need to be asking on the onboarding. The onboarding is the first part, the first 24 to 48 hours. What happens? So most of the times the process is, you'll ask your clients to watch a video, you'll make sure they have access to everything, you'll set the client expectations with them, everything, and finally you'll book in a call with them to showcase everything. Cool? Not showcase what to do on the program, but the expectations, what they need to do, etc. You need to motivate them to do the work. They bought the program, now they need to buy into taking action with the program. So at the end of that onboarding, at the end of that call, you ask, from a scale of 1 to 10, how good was the onboarding? And then you essentially get a number, and if it is not 10, you always ask, what was missing for a 10? Again, feedback loop. And then you have net promoter score, which this has to be done every time a new client completes the onboarding. And the net promoter score is asking a simple question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this program to a friend or colleague? So how to interpret these results? If you have 9 or 10, you have someone that is recommending. If you have someone that says 7 or 8, you have someone neutral. And if you have 6 or less than 6, less than 6, you have someone that is not recommending, but actually telling the program is bad. So this is a clear way to track client sentiment. And if you have this, or once you have this, you will be able to understand what's going on, and you have to suggest improvements, always asking for recommendations from your clients to report to your coach. Okay? How often? Communication and feedback should be every single day. Okay? The more communication, the more feedback flows between your coach and yourself, between your leader and yourself, the better. And actually, ask for feedback. Always ask for feedback. Cool? So you need to be tracking this net promoter score, of course, to every client. And you need to do it on a particular moment of your process. Something pretty standard after the first month of joining, so that they can have some time to see if this works. Or it can be before. It depends on the particular design of your program, of the of your leaders program. Okay, so in terms of real examples, I already gave them to you, like on this explanation. And in terms of templates, I would really love for you essentially to create step-by-step guides on what I said on this Loom, plus what says on these two books, and then showcasing them to your coach. Why? Because you are the most important role in the back end of the business. And the back end of the business has to be, as its a specialty, documenting processes. So you need to document processes so that you can follow them, other people can follow them, and that's something else you have to ask to your coach, that like, hey, it's really important to document processes, both for clients but for the rest of the team. This is really key. Okay, this is all I wanted to cover. As I said, I want you to attend the combined CSM trainings so that we can go deeper and deeper on this topic. Okay, I hope this worked, and see you later.